I'm here at Surrey Hills Cycleworks, and today I'm going to be comparing the frame shapes of the Tarmac SL7 to the Specialized Tarmac SL8. Let's get in there and have a look. As you can see here, this is my bike, the Specialized Tarmac SL7, and I'm going to be comparing it directly to the Specialized SL8. One thing to note when comparing these frame shapes is that this is a size 58 and this is a size 54. But coming in closer, I think we're going to start at obviously the front end, but most of the differences and changes on this bike are actually at the back end. So we'll start at the front, work our way backwards. If we start here with the SL7, you can see the head tube is much more of almost like a C shape on either side, and there's not an amazing blend into the fork here. And you'll also probably notice on the SL8, the fork's going to be a lot narrower and a lot sharper on the front here. Then if we compare that directly to the SL8, you could probably see that it starts narrower at the top, starts to bulge out a bit more to the sides, and it actually fits a lot more cleanly into the fork. And also the fork blade itself is actually a much sharper shape, it's much narrower from here. If we take you onto a side view now, you can see that actually the connection part between this is much simpler on the SL7. It starts to fare out much higher up on the shoulder of the fork. And then if we go straight to the SL8, you can actually see the fitting is much smoother between the fork and the head tube there. Another difference is that actually it's much more rounded around the back here, because obviously with the new rules you can get a much deeper head tube when you compare that to this one. This section here is much more square right here, and it's not shallow, but it's much shallower than the SL8. When you're here in person, especially with this handlebar on, the bulge isn't so bulgy. I kind of thought it looked like a beluga whale on the photos and stuff, but in person actually it's a bit flatter. I think it's just the cut that goes up this way that makes it look more bulgy than it is on the front. The actual fork itself is a little bit deeper on the SL8 as well, especially higher up, and then it narrows as it goes towards the bottom. Whereas on the SL7, it seems a bit more rounded, the whole tube itself. Let's go to the handlebars. So if we start with the SL7 here, you can see, of course, this was the original SL7, so it comes with the two-piece here. And the new one, the Roval Rapide cockpit, is a nice smooth one-piece. So I'd imagine there's a nice watt saving there. Second of all, on the Aerofly bars here, you've got the nice grippy bits, and that stays and remains on the Rapide cockpit as well. They're just a little bit smaller, but because it's a matte finish, they actually feel a bit more grippy than they do on the original ones, even though the bumps are a little bit smaller on the new ones. Then if we come to the actual profile of the handlebars themselves, as you can see, these ones kind of have the similar width and depth to them the whole way through, whereas the new ones here, they're a lot deeper in the middle, I'm sure for sturdiness, and then they shallow as they go towards the outside. So they look a little bit sleeker in that sense. There's the old ones, and there is the new ones. A lot cleaner. Next up, I'm going to go onto the top tube, and you can see the top tube of the SL8 is actually a lot rounder than the SL7. The SL7 has much more of it kind of almost looks a bit boxier now, maybe a bit more triangular around the frame there. You can almost see it a bit more from this side because you have a much harder edge on the top corners, whereas this is much more circular. As we move towards the back of the frame, both the SL7 and the SL8 have this nice taper off into the seat tube here. But one thing with the SL8, it is actually a lot narrower from the front. So if I get a front-on view from here, the actual seat tube itself is a little bit narrower than the seat tube on the SL7. If we start to move down a little bit, we can see that the actual UCI sticker itself has changed from a circle to a square shape. Then next up, we can keep moving down, and the next thing we see here is the attachment of the seat stays. So on the SL7, they're actually a lot bigger, a lot more aggressive than the SL6. But one of the new features is that actually apparently, if you imagine this in thirds, if you stick it on the back third here, you get a much better aerodynamic attachment to the seat stay as you do when it's more towards the front third here. This is what they found from Specialized testing. When we start to move downwards, this shape here pretty much remains the same. It obviously seems to be working for Specialized. They just have a small cutout for the wheel on both sides. But once again, the SL7 is a bit more square and it's a bit more rounded off on the SL8. On the actual seat stays themselves, the SL7 is actually a lot deeper, but on the SL6, it does hold a similar shape. it's just a lot narrower, just a lot smaller, and I'd imagine that saves them a bit of weight. I'm going to bring you lower down here to the lower section of the SL8 because everything from this bolt downwards, and all the way along the bottom here is a pretty much bang-on replica of the Specialized Athos. And I think using the knowledge and the carbon layup from the Athos, they've managed to save that massive amount of weight from the SL8 compared to the SL7. Then finally, if we finish up with the down tube, you can see that once again, this is a bit more rounded. It is very rounded on the SL7 as well, but it's still, even up higher here, you've still got more square edges around the outside. It's a lot less of a round shape than the SL8. The wheels from bike to bike are the same. They've decided to stick with this Roval Rapide CLX shape, and it's a one that I'm a massive fan on. I mean, I've got a 28mm tyre on here, and it measures out to 30mm, and you can still see the edge poke around a little bit. And it's the same situation with these Vittoria Corsas. These are a 28mm Vittoria, and you can just about see this black edge there. So the wheel is wider than the tyre. Well, that's a comparison between the frame shapes of these bikes. Just for fun, I'm gonna weigh them both in and compare them side to side with my ropey little suitcase scales. Please bear in mind that the SL7 is meant to be heavier than the SL8, and mine is a 58 and this is a 54, so we should see a massive difference in these two bikes. So I'm here with Dave. He is the owner of the shop and this lovely bike. And Dave, feel free to run us the changes that you've made to your bike and anything I might have missed.
So I'm very particular about my bike setup. I always ride a Specialized Tarmac with a 120 stem, 42 handlebar. I use a 130 power saddle, not the power mirror, because I like a really rigid, firm saddle. And I love using the SRAM gearing. I've changed to a rotor crankset because I liked the bigger chainrings that I could get on that, which are the 50-37. And I've gone down to a 10-28 cassette because I prefer the tighter ratios on the cassette. I'm using Vittoria tubeless tyres because I use tan wall tyres and I always think they look badass. When riding this bike, I can give a direct comparison to all of the previous versions of the Tarmac going back about 15 years, even back to the old Gerolsteiner days when I had one with a bladed seat tube and an 1.8" steerer tube. I've had every single Tarmac ever since. This bike is the lightest, liveliest and fastest I've ridden. One of the most important kind of ride characteristics I can feel when riding this bike is how really nicely it accelerates, how lively it feels. Get out the saddle and flip the bike left and right, it just accelerates and goes forward really nicely. Most of that is down to the design of the back end of the bike. It really does feel like an Athos in terms of the drivetrain stiffness and the comfort, but with the aerodynamics of the handlebar and the head tube area just kind of slides through the air and hold speed. It's, as they say, it's the best bike you can get. Race bike. It's amazing.
Well everyone, this has been my comparison between the Specialized SL7 compared to the SL8, just comparing all the frame shapes and what the differences are. Thank you to Surrey Hills Cycleworks for letting me film this bike and use their shop. And if you need any Specialized, any BMCs, any Cervelos, these guys have got it. If you found this video enjoyable, give it a like for me. This has been Cycling Unboxed. See you in the next one.